Greetings. Welcome to Speak Nerd and Enter.
Countdown started.
It's already recording. You're fucking talking over me. Dick. I was about to do the intro. Right, now I don't want to.
That was the best intro ever. That was actually
far better. Hey, you want to do the intro? It's like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'm going to talk. I'll do the intro.
There was no countdown.
God, you are so new at this.
Just as Mark started, he was like,
Oh, my favorite.
And it was great because it started with the exasperation and it ended with just such anger in that sigh.
Oh my God. I am probably going to leave all of this in, but just in case I don't, welcome to the Speak Nerd and Enter podcast. It is right after Christmas and we're talking about stuff and things. And Rich is, as usual, wrong about everything he talks about.
Or right about most things.
All right, so anyway, we were discussing in the pre-show what we were going to discuss, and some of us have not done our homework, so we're not ready to discuss what two of the people really want to talk about, but they can wait till we finish the damn book. So I think we're going to start with James Gunn and the shakeup of the DC universe. Like, I've been seeing them getting a lot of hate for letting Henry Cavill go to do 40K, which I'm all in favor of, for not doing the next Wonder Woman movie. And there's rumors that Gal Gadot is not going to be reprising her role as Wonder Woman. And there's this huge shakeup on the DC universe. And the point I made before we went live was I'm okay with that. Like, DC movies are playing catch up to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. They've never been as good. They've never been as compelling. They've never been as entertaining. They're a bit mismatch and not a cohesive storytelling kind of, theme that runs through all of them. And it just feels like, like missed opportunities. No, I don't look at any of those movies and go, yeah, my favorite DC movie is probably Shazam, which I know Rich hates. That one was entertaining and it was funny and whatever. But if Shazam is your best movie, right, or Wonder Woman the first Wonder Woman would probably be up there close to it, and that was good, but it wasn't what some of the other ones were. So like, I'm actually like, come in, clear the slate, start over. I'm okay with it. Now, when they bring out their new slate of stuff, if they don't deliver, then DC's in real trouble. But if they do deliver, then I think they can overcome kind of some of that deficit that they've been, falling behind. What we don't need is another Batman origin story. How many Batman movies we have? We've got all of those. And I've liked all the Batman movies. I don't want to, say that, stop making Batman movies. I've liked all of them in their own way. So I have no issue with seeing Batman on the big screen and whatnot. But man, you guys keep going back to that same well, whereas Marvel's like, you know what, let's put a tree in there and give this raccoon a machine gun and we'll go with that, and all you guys can do is mess around with Batman. So I'm actually in favor of what DC is doing right now. James Gunn is like, clear the slate, let's fix some things up, and let's put our cinematic universe on track. It's getting a lot of hate, but I'm more hopeful about what they're doing than I am skeptical.
Well, you remember, I'm going to say something on that real quick because I don't care what anybody else thinks. So there's two things on that I think are important to say. First off, you made a good point, okay, on just going in and starting the story. I think we've talked about that aspect before, especially with like 40K. We're like, well, but there's so much backstory you got to get through before people get caught up. No, they don't. You can do just what Marvel did, where it's not always an origin story. Yes, some of them did have that, but not all of them. Some of them, the characters just show up and people are kind of like, okay, I'm along for the ride. And then eventually that'll come along and that'll be fine. It'll be discovery as we go through. And they're able to enjoy it. I think audiences are able to do that now. So you don't have to worry about the origin story if no one knows what Batman's origin is, But I mean, if you bring in like Hawkman or somebody that nobody cares about, sure, no one's going to know. But again, who's going to care, right? You got to make the character compelling before someone wants to know what happened. Star-Lord, they didn't tell you what happened with him. They got a compelling story going on first. And then once you had the story going and people were invested and everybody was into the raccoon and the tree, everybody cried for Groot dying and all that stuff. Spoiler. Then
out of a derailed character.
Then you can do the origin story because people then start saying, well, man, I wonder how this started, or I wonder how this, that kind of thing. So it gives you that leeway. But if you don't have a good story, who cares what the origin is, right? So I think you're right in that. You don't have to worry about that anymore. It doesn't have to be part of the package. People know how this works, And the other thing, though, do you think they have to get rid of Henry Cavill or Gal Gadot in order to make that successful? I would argue that those two were actually the best parts of their respective
Right. I agree
properties.
with you. And again, I'm not saying I'm for getting rid of, because I think Gal Gadot, when she got announced as Wonder Woman, everybody's like, she's too skinny, or she's not this, or there was some fanboy hate of that's not Wonder Woman. But I think she has definitely acquitted herself as an entirely serviceable and good and cinematic Wonder Woman. Like, I like her in the role, but she's not the only person that could ever play that role either. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm ambivalent. I'm not like, I like her as Wonder Woman. I'm not complaining about her. I think she's fine. And if she wanted to keep playing the role, awesome. Henry Cavill is a great Superman, but he got some static when they announced him. They're like, who's this guy? He's not Superman, blah, blah, blah. So there's always people. It's the same thing with every time there's a new Doctor Who, people are like, that's not the Doctor. And then people love the Doctor Who and they're like, yeah, it is the Doctor. And it's kind of the same thing with these guys. So I don't think you need to fire them. But this is where the sausage is made. Maybe they have these ridiculously expensive contracts, and DC's like, "Well, can't do that." So we're
now
just
that's
hire somebody we can
probably
afford.
now I agree with that. That's actually something that I thought about, and I've actually heard that from a couple other sources too. That one of the things they're concerned about is, yeah, we do have these stars, but they're commanding a lot more now, and we're not sure about the return on investment. Can we just do something cheaper, start out again, and then if it becomes a big deal, kind of like with the Marvel model, then okay. But if not, then we haven't lost.
But can
the
you
house.
do that? I mean, can you do that really well? I mean, let's be
I
honest.
can. I don't know
What
about
you
them.
could, yes, you could. But I mean, that's
No,
the
I
thing. Like,
couldn't.
if you take a cheaper actor, are you really getting somebody who can portray a story? I mean, you're talking about having a compelling story. A story can be, made or broken
Mhm.
purely based on the actors you have portraying that story. But
I
I would say
agree.
that I've always been kind of sour on DC anyway.
Yeah.
So
Well, DC has, let's be honest, DC was the original in many different ways and in many different characters, but the characters were not good when you saw the ripoffs that came out afterward that had more depth,
right.
more uh, they were better characters. It was a refined ripoff in many
Well, right.
cases.
Yes,
Well,
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
because I mean, when we talk about Batman, we talk about the origin story.
And I
Like the
try not
all
to.
the only villain that I've seen that Batman has to face off against that's worth a damn is the Joker. He's the only one
Yeah.
that is a compelling foil to Batman. When you get beyond the
Mm.
Joker,
And
what you
only when
have,
he's done right, and only when the Joker's done right.
yeah,
The Joker can be a very, we've seen hacky versions of each of those characters. It has to be done well. And that was
It's
the thing about the Joker, is that when you, like you were saying, Mark, you get a good version or a good story
right.
of
Mhm.
that character and the actor who can pull it off, and you got something amazing with
Right.
Joaquin
And so here's the
Phoenix.
thing,
And,
like DC is known for their campiness. They have very campy villains that you're like, this is the dumbest thing I've ever heard of. And the Christopher Nolan Batman, where they brought in Scarecrow, like that version of Scarecrow, well, I was like, okay, that's how you do Scarecrow in a filmed modern live action, set without it being stupid and campy. And so
yeah,
Scarecrow to me is a stupid campy villain, whatever. And
yeah.
I don't read the comic, whatever. So judge me.
No, you're right.
But when I saw that version, I was like, oh,
That was good to see
okay.
the story.
Like I really liked that kind of semi-realistic, gritty take on it. And I was down with it. Like, so there's
Yeah.
some things that they've absolutely done right. Now, as far as like firing the big name actors or whatever, there's some that, like, I don't think you can ever get rid of Robert Downey Jr. as Iron Man. Like, man, he was
Right.
born for that role and he was amazing. And nobody, I think, can really see anybody else in that role. Could somebody else play Hawkeye? Sure. Could somebody else play Scarlet Witch? Sure. Now they got some big actors in there, but I could see those roles being played by somebody else and it not detracting from the role, because when we go to the
Right.
movies, we want to see, Batman and Superman. I don't want to see Henry Cavill or The Rock.
Right.
You know what I mean? And that can be
Right.
part of the problem with an actor who is too big of a name or too big of a star, where anything I see Ryan Reynolds in, I'm seeing Ryan Reynolds, and that's part of the reason he's hired is to be Ryan Reynolds in these various roles, and I understand that. But then you have some other actors who disappear into their role and become that, and so like I don't know if that answers the question, but I absolutely think there's enough actors in the world that if we go look for a passionate person who can be the new Superman or the new Wonder Woman or Flash or whoever, or even some smaller role, I think there's a bunch of actors who'd be like, I get to get in on the ground floor of the new DC cinematic universe, sign me up. And secondly, there's enough actors out there that, you know, yes, we can find another person to play Superman. And again, could he be played poorly? Sure. Could he be played amazing and be just as good as Henry Cavill was? Maybe, hopefully. Yeah, I don't see how not, because most of Henry Cavill's, I mean, he's a good actor, but he looks the part. And that's 80% of it. You know what I mean? Like, you have to be a good actor.
Well, sure.
But you couldn't get Nicolas Cage to play Superman. That would be dumb.
Oh my God.
But right, yeah. But so did Christopher Reeve. Christopher Reeve looked the part too. But I think he and Henry Cavill had the same thing, and they had a passion for the character. They really loved the character. And that's the thing that I like, is that they have that passion for them. Robert Downey Jr., I think, had the same thing for his too. Yeah. And because his career was on an ebb. So it was, when he was cast as Tony Stark, that was a much more reasonable proposition financially for them than, I don't know, whoever was going to be the big star in 2008. Who the hell remembers? But, his was kind of surprising. Iron Man, Robert Downey Jr., all right. The thing that got us all to go there and see it, of course, was the fact that you saw the suit in the newspaper, or in the, not in the newspaper, in the, in like the Yahoo News and all that crap, when they were taking pictures of, him fighting Warmonger on the streets of New York and all that stuff. And I remember seeing the picture of it and thinking, man, that does look cool. I'll go check that out just to see what the robots are like, or what the armor's like and all that. And then when he did the suit up bit, he as Tony Stark was great. So the quips and everything were awesome and all that. But then you had the effects to back it up, and then a decent story. Was it A+ story? Not really. But you had enough good stuff in there, his research and development and all that, where you actually use that for character development rather than just telling the story. You're getting to know this version of Tony, which is not the version that was in the comics. Tony in the comics is not that charismatic. He's just not. And so the audience that didn't know Tony, didn't know any of that, fell in love with him, fell in love with the idea. And then you got that tree growing like Mark was talking about. But man, that was lightning in a bottle. That's a tough thing to do.
Right. But to think that DC couldn't capture their own version of lightning in a bottle with it, because we've had 3 Spider-Man, we've had, I don't know, a dozen Batmen, right? So to think that we can't get a new Wonder Woman, or that we can't get a new, Flash, whoever, like nobody's married to the Flash. Like the guy that got playing the Flash, he was fine and he was funny and I enjoyed him.
But he was,
he's since in his personal life gone all crazy and nuts and is doing all these things and getting arrested, and I think everybody's like, time for a new Flash. You know what I mean? Yeah,
he's the guy they had playing the Flash was kind of a ripoff of well, not kind of, he was a ripoff of what's his face from X-Men, Magneto's son.
Quicksilver.
Yes, thank you. Quicksilver. He's a ripoff of that character. And Quicksilver, by the way, was not that character in the comic books either. So they've taken a lot of liberties that way, but it played well. And you kind of dug that character. Or if you didn't, you can't deny the fact that they were popular the way they were portrayed. But when you talk about like Gal Gadot and Henry Cavill, I don't know, man. They kind of inhabited that character. Gal Gadot, I was one of those people when, I saw her picture, I was like, doesn't make me think of Wonder Woman,
right? But she always seemed a little scrawny for an Amazonian warrior. You know what I mean? Like, because you saw her in the Fast and the Furious movies and some of the others, and she's a very attractive but very slim woman, and that's not typically what you think of when you think Wonder Woman, Amazonian, warrior. But man, she pulled it off though.
She did.
Because you can do some crazy things with costuming, and I'm sure she worked out and etc. And again, I have no complaints at all. That's more of an observation. Like, wow, she's kind of. I would not have gone with somebody so skinny
But see, that's the thing, is that her and Henry Cavill won me over as fans to their character. Not even talking about the movie, because the movies they were in had their ups and downs, some really good stuff, some really poor stuff, but they made the movies enjoyable, right?
Okay.
And so now when this kind of thing happens, I kind of feel like they're being punished for things that are not their failure, and they're not being given what I wanted to see, which was, okay, well, you got a storyteller in like James Gunn. And so now he's in the composer position where he's composing this universe. I wanted to kind of see what he was going to do for them. I wanted to see that end product so I could see, well, here's a good Wonder Woman story.
All right, let me put on the tinfoil hat for a second. Okay. It could very well be, and you know, I don't know if this is the case. They're going to go fire everybody and start over. That doesn't mean that they can't very quietly go to Gal Gadot and Henry Cavill and be like, we're going to bring you in, but we want to keep it on the down low and these kind of things. Probably that's not what they're going to do. But again, them firing everybody, great. We're going to hire a new Superman. Henry Cavill is free to throw his hat in the ring, and he's got a leg up because his resume has, oh, look, he's played Superman before or whatever, you know, and I don't know, but that's my point is if you're going to clear the decks and start over. And if you decide, you know, you're going to bring somebody back, like Quicksilver from the X-Men movies has now made an appearance in the Marvel cinematic versions. And apparently he's going to be in the next one because that was a standout character and he did really, really well. And people like him, and cool, we're going to pick and choose what we need. So there's precedent on the Marvel side of the fence of doing that exact thing. It's not to say, now I don't think they will, because I think there is some contractual, like, it would cost us a gajillion dollars to have Henry Cavill do this.
And I can't imagine.
And we're trying to run a profitable business here, not just, you know, do some fanboy service. So let's go get an actor that we can afford, that we can lock in for X number of movies. I think
it's even more simpler than that. They've got to redo the bloody thing. Everything that's been done in the DC universe has been generally poor. Okay, like Sean, I'll agree with your point. There's been some ups, there's been some downs, but I'm going to say more downs than ups.
Yeah.
And so I think right now they need to come up with a cohesive sort of idea of what they're doing. The thing that worked with the Marvel movies is that while they were standalone movies, it was part of this greater story arc, and you had to follow that along. In the DC universe, I've never seen that. Where is that? And I think that's ultimately what's missing. So I think they will get to your point, Mark, of saying, okay, well, now that we have an idea of what we're doing, who can we get to play it? I don't even think they're at that point yet. I think they're just let's just cut them loose. They can go do what they need to do, and we can sit back here and take the time we need to do this. You know,
and remember, this is the same studio that wrote off $100 million Batwoman movie that was going to be terrible. They're just like, this is going to hurt the brand. So apparently whoever's been in charge over there has delivered a lackluster DC cinematic universe. And they had some real stinkers on deck. You know what I mean? They're like, okay, look, man, we got to fix all this. And if the answer to that is throw out two really, really good but expensive actors along with all of the, those babies with that bathwater, then so be it. You know what I mean?
But then that's where they're coming from. Don't you think it's an uphill battle? Because a
little bit,
maybe a needless one, because you pissed off all the people who were fans of the ones from before.
I don't think so, because people generally hate change, right? But as soon as you put forward a product that they will buy into, they'll quickly forget that part, and then they'll.
Do I think any of these people are going to decide not to see the next Superman movie? No.
They'll go
I don't think so either. But
they're going to get an unknown who looks like Superman, or I don't know who they're going to get. But let's say it's a relatively unknown actor. They're not going to say, "No, I love Henry Cavill so much, I don't want to see this." I'm not seeing it.
Okay.
They'll be too busy watching.
All right, I'll call James Gunn and tell him go ahead.
That's right, and they're going to watch it on Amazon Prime, Rich.
Let me tell you. So I'm listening to all the points you guys are making. And
I was the most right.
I sense a fundamental misunderstanding of what the Marvel and the DC universes represent. So the DC universe represents a mythic take on the idea of the hero trope.
We'll tell them that.
Marvel, let me finish. You talked for a good long while. Let me finish. Shut up.
So, that was funny. I had to get that in.
Yeah, I know. The Marvel universe always represented the world outside your window.
Would you say that's their pastiche?
Their pastiche. You want to use fancy word, fancy French word. Yeah, yes, it's their pastiche. It's their
The
innuendo.
raison d'être?
It's their je ne sais quoi. It's seriously, DC has always been a representation of mythic tropes. Marvel has always been a representation of a world you can relate to as an average guy.
Okay, I had never looked at it that way, but as you say that, I see what you're saying, and I agree with it. Yeah, I never really heard it put like that, but yes.
But if you ever read Avengers versus the Justice League, that's exactly what they. So in Avengers versus Justice League by George Perez, and
I'm familiar with it.
Yeah. But
it was a big deal when it came out. Yeah,
it was a big deal, and it's still a big deal since George Perez died. But what they did was they put the DC characters in the Marvel universe, and the DC characters looked at the Marvel universe and said, "What the hell is up? This place is a garbage land." And then they put the Marvel characters in the DC universe, and they said, "This place is like Nazi Germany. It's so clean and efficient." I see
because that's what I think of when I think about Nazi Germany is how clean and efficient they were.
No, but I mean, you have to
the trains ran on time to the gulags. Gosh darn it!
Yes, but
and
you have to
from
imagine
a gentleman
someone
who's of Jewish descent. Yes,
yes, you have to imagine someone coming from a universe where everything is the world outside your window.
Yeah.
And you go to a place where everything is so clean and so ordered, and we look up to our icons and our heroes, and they're going to save us all. Very much
like Astro City feels very much along that trope as well, to put it in it but again, I think Astro City is pulling it off. DC Cinematic Universe is not.
Well, the DC Cinematic Universe, I will give you this. The DC Cinematic Universe has had some trips.
Yeah.
Whereas the Marvel Cinematic Universe has managed to overcome anything that has been weak with everything that's so strong has overcome everything that's weak. Whereas in the DC Cinematic Universe, it's kind of been a series of faltering steps, like a toddler kind of moving forward. Whereas the Marvel Cinematic Universe has had some really high points and some kind of faltering. They've never been terrible. They've never fallen down, but they've kind of stumbled. You know what I'm saying? The comparison between the two isn't really fair, and I agree with you. DC's always been playing catch up.
Here's the thing, though. I think it is a fair comparison because they're both superhero cinematic universes derived from comic book companies, and that's what you're bringing to the marketplace. And to say, "Oh no, we're different," we're artisan pies, not pizza. No, F that noise. We want to see some superhero movies and some cool stuff with characters we're familiar with. Go. And so far, this is what you've delivered. It's like just like that, only darker and less funny. That's what it feels like.
Being a bunch of old nerds, this is the old argument: DC versus Marvel. This is the old fight.
Excelsior, make mine Marvel.
If I may, Rich, I think that's because I'm not the comic book nerd you guys are, right? The thing that gets me to go see a movie. The thing that gets me to go see a movie is, does it look interesting? That's what you want the general public to do. They're not making movies to necessarily appease the nerdy crowd. Certainly that is part of it, but largely you want people to go to a movie and pay money to go see that movie. So it's really about the marketability. Can you get your girlfriend or your wife to go see that movie with you? She doesn't care that it's, this is the Marvel universe versus the DC. She doesn't care. Is she going to be entertained? Right. And ultimately, at the end of the day, I think that's what matters to the suits in the shop that are putting up the money.
Yeah, and back to your point, Rich. Like, I really liked what you said about DC was supposed to be like these Greek gods given form, and they're in the modern day doing this stuff, and Marvel being the kind of right outside your universe, but or right outside your window, but a kind of a different take. Like, I like that, and I see where Marvel is accomplishing that. This is the real world. But now we have some superheroes, and now we have Doctor Strange, and now we have a couple other things, and they've taken us from the plausibility of Tony Stark being able to invent some cool stuff to literally now we have aliens and sorcerers, and they did a really good job of leading us to now we're in the Marvel universe with mutants and sorcerers and aliens and all that stuff. But they didn't start there. They started with, could somebody invent this cool technology and make themselves a combat suit? Oh yeah, I could buy that, and that was really cool. I haven't seen anything from DC that is like, Greek gods given form or has the same vibes I get when I read Astro City. So you saying it, I go, okay, I could see that from the DC Comics universe. And I've read enough DC Comics to go, yeah, I see that. But if you failed to translate your kind of, starting point of here's the focal point of all of our comics are from this to this, and you've thrown that all out the window for your cinematic universe, because I'm seeing none of that, with the exception of Superman. But again, this guy's basically a god anyway. I wish that someone in DC had said, hey guys, this is, Marvel's doing it this way. We want to do it this way because that's the way we've always approached our comics. How do we translate that into a movie? Let's keep that in mind. It doesn't feel like they've done that.
So is this the failure of transmitting one type of media into another type of media? So film,
some of it, yeah.
So film by its nature has limitations that the graphic novel, the comic book, the animated universe does not. Everything is possible in a comic book animation universe. All concepts, no matter how bizarre, are attainable because you can draw them. Whereas in the
or hear what the character is thinking with a thought bubble, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, exactly. So you have a much wider array of tools to use to bring your story across. Whereas in the cinematic universe, it's what you can see, what you can hear, what you can transmit, subtitles,
read, exposition, whatever. Yeah,
exposition, but it's much more limited because you have to put it down on that medium. Whereas the drawing medium is much wider.
Right, but that difficulty exists for both Marvel and DC, and Marvel has successfully negotiated it.
Well, they did it first. They did it first.
Yeah.
Their phase one stuff and all the way through Endgame, they did good.
Right. Well, I think with Endgame, they had this big, here's the bad guy, here's the main bad guy that all of these other movies are in some way leading toward this big showdown. Everything since then has felt a little disjointed because they haven't set up the next bad guy. We know that has something to do with a multiverse and probably is going to end up being Kang or something like that. But whatever, he's not as to me as I'm not looking at him as dangerous as Thanos. It's like, oh, we see how cool the Hulk is, and he's beating these things up with one thing, and then Thanos just mops the floor with him, and we're like, whoa, this Thanos guy is tough. He just beat up the Hulk, and he beat up Thor, and oh my gosh, like they set him up to be this main bad guy, but there isn't somebody for the next phase yet. But Marvel does have plenty of stuff to draw upon from the comics to set up the next arc of big main bad guys, right? We got some
they
stuff
do.
in House of M, and we got the Secret Invasions coming up, and
I think they run into a couple problems though, because if you think about it, you got the problem of power creep because you had Thanos, and what do you do to top him? Who's a bigger threat than that, and all that kind of thing. So you end up with this power creep problem there, and the fact that Thanos was also a very mature villain. He was a compelling villain because he was deadly serious. He had a good point. I know there's people who argue with his, oh no, it's stupid because you could have done this and this and this, whatever. Right. His motivations, his belief, his philosophy in what he was doing and why he was doing it, what he was willing to sacrifice was also important to that character. And that's why he was such a compelling character. And Josh Brolin did a great job with him, right? Mm-hmm. That I think is vitally important. You got to have a great villain. Kang didn't do that for me, man.
Agreed. Yep.
He didn't do that, and it felt more comic than severe.
Yeah.
And the thing that I think set the bar for that stuff, for that kind of arc, was Lord of the Rings. I think, most of the guys you were talking about, like, are you going to get your girlfriends to go see this, and drag your wife to see it? And are they going to dig it? Lord of the Rings was that. I was talking to Helena about this the other day because I've seen so many, especially women who've never watched Lord of the Rings because they think, it's nerd stuff. I'm not doing that. I don't like that sort of thing. I just got dragons and stuff. I don't get into that stuff, right? But they get dragged to it. And halfway through the first movie, they've fallen in love with, the hobbits. They love Gandalf. And they love the idea of Aragorn and Legolas and all those characters because of the character building, because of the severity of the story as well. It had some comedic relief to it, but it wasn't a comedy. Most of the time it was harrowing. Most of the time it was anxiety inducing for people, And I think that template has always worked because it is relatable to life. And as soon as you try to get away from that, then you go down the kind of Hollywood trope where you're starting to give too much catharsis. You know what I mean? And that comes across as not real. And once you've seen that a couple times, you get too much saccharin and you're like, it's too sweet. I don't need that. I want something that's a little more realistic. And I think that was the perfect example, taking a book or a series of books that people loved. And you talk about running the risk of pissing your base off. I mean, that was a big one, right? But they did it. Not only did they do it, but they brought in, I'm going to, paint with a broad brush. They brought in everybody. Everybody loved it. I've seen so many different people from all walks of life who've seen those movies and just at 3 hours, 3.5 hours, the extended versions, all that stuff, they are wrapped.
Yeah.
Remember you were here when my mother-in-law, we showed it to my mother-in-law and her sister and stuff like that over here at my house, right? Remember that, Mark?
Yep.
Never, ever, ever, ever would I have thought that my wife's mother would have been into that. Never. By the end of that movie, and we're talking a 3-hour movie, by the end of the movie, they were like, is that it? Wait a minute. What happened? I need to see the rest, know?
But that's full of good actors and masterful storytelling.
But that's what I mean. That was the bar. That was
Yeah.
the bar. And that's what, as a culture, just a worldwide culture, because that's what we're in now. As a worldwide culture, that's the bar, man. And that movie, those series of movies were what, 20 some years ago?
Yeah, about 20 years ago.
2001 to 2008.
And still, that is the bar for all that everyone measures it against. So if you can't do that, everybody's going to look at it like less than. It's not going to be as good. And so you're asking people to commit to 10 movies, 20 movies, however much time you got with that and all. You better bring it. You better bring that level of creativity.
Right, but unfortunately, we've seen too many people not bring it.
Right. And that sours it. That's where I'm talking about, that saccharin level overcoming people.
Well, but that's where I think that studios don't have a goal as to what they're doing. What drives our creation here? Are we just going for the one movie?
Yeah.
Are we trying to create this bigger thing? Marvel wanted to create a bigger thing. Every movie aimed towards that end point, and I forget who made that point earlier.
Right, but prior to Marvel, there was the studios just trying to do a thing and make some money, and that's why they were never as good.
Right, exactly.
I'm looking at you, Sony Spider-Man. I'm looking at you at the X-Men movies. Like, they're fine, but they're missing something that the Marvel Cinematic Universe had because they had that passion. And again, I'm not saying the people that made those movies don't have it, but again, Hollywood is a factory. They're like, we're going to make a movie and we're going to put it out, and we want to make it. We want to get a return on our investment.
That's why they remake the same story premise over and over again.
Right.
That's the thing is that it has to be the bottom line, right? They're judging everything based on how much money they make at the end of the box office. It's not based on whether this is a sustainable property that they're going to move forward. That's what it's so going.
Well, I think that's changing now that we've seen Lord of the Rings back in the day and the Matrix and definitely with the Marvel Cinematic Universe. You think there's not somebody out there that's like, wow, if I could have a Marvel Cinematic Universe that would tie my next 20 movies together.
Right.
and
See,
made
I know-
all of them better than any
I-
individual one would have done by itself had it been a separate movie.
I think both are true simultaneously right now. I think, Mark, you're right. I think it is changing,
So
but
you believe
I
in the
think the richest,
multiverse.
whatever. I think Mark is right that it's changing. I think Rich is right is that there are those that look at the bottom line, because if we look at the Rings of Power that was put out by Amazon, it's piss poor. It looks like somebody ticked boxes and just said, here, people will consume. But Sean, I think that goes to your point to saying, okay, people are going to tune out of this eventually and quite quickly. I mean, I got through I got through 3/4 of an episode and then thought, fuck this, I'm not going to watch it.
Yeah.
Whereas the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Sean, I got into that simply because you said you should go watch this movie, and I said, I don't know, do I know enough to do it? And you were like, yeah, go watch it. And then I was instantly sucked in. I had to see what happened next. Did I like every movie? No, but I had to keep going because I was invested in the story. So I think it's right. It's changing, but I think the industry is having a hard time navigating those waters.
Well, you know what I think it is, honestly? It's the amount of passion. Because if you look at that bar that we were talking about with Tolkien, how long did he spend, just crafting that world, putting it together?
A weekend.
The Lord of the Rings was a very small window of time in that entire creation that he had, right? He spent so much time, even till he died, and still hadn't finished polishing that world, not even close. But he put so much effort and so much passion into it that it came through. You don't have that with these other things. You just don't.
You have it with Game of Thrones. Like you can feel that level of, that's a world that exists and has this history and has all of these things. Like I know who Bran the Builder is because I heard people talking about him because they know who Bran the Builder is.
Yeah.
Right. But I've never seen that guy in a movie. Right. They're just like, great, he built a bunch of stuff. And
it sounds like a kid show on PBS.
It does, doesn't it?
But yeah, that was the closest one since Lord of the Rings.
Yes.
To do the same, closest. But even then, they tripped up at the end.
And let's go back to the Matrix movies. The first one is the only one that really counts. But that world felt like there was a lot going on in it that wasn't necessarily being shown.
Yeah.
Like there was definitely some world building that you could feel around it. I'm going to go with the John Wick movies. Like as they've gone along, you got these gold coins that represent things and this, group of assassins and this is like secret world. Like the world building behind that is one of the things that sets it apart from being just another action movie. You know what I mean? Like it's that world, but again, not to the extent of Tolkien and Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones. But that kind of world building and attention to detail, like set it in this larger, I was listening to a podcast about movies the other day, and they were saying like, the movie is like this little window that you get to see in what's going on in this movie. But then there's the movie that takes place outside the movie. What's going on that you don't see. And that's what we're talking about here is all of this stuff is 100% of what we're seeing on screen in this movie. What's happening. Okay, that's cool. And that can be fine. But when there's other stuff and you feel like there's other stuff that has happened or is happening, that grounds the world and builds it. You know what I mean? It's like now you can, we're seeing events that are taking place in a larger universe.
See, I honestly feel that the things that happen in the outside world that I can't see don't matter because I don't see them. And if they really mattered, they would happen in front of me because I'm the thing that matters the most. And I think we can all agree that that's actually how things work.
It all centers on me.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like they're trapped in some strange world that I'm not the center of.
Right.
So the thing about Tolkien that a lot of people don't know is a lot of what was written for Tolkien's entire universe was done in his back shed at night after he did everything he did as a professor at Oxford, just in his spare time. So he was sitting in a cold back room typing away on a like a regular typewriter, putting all this stuff together that became this grand universe that people have now advantaged upon to create their own message.
Right? Yeah, you're right. Like even I heard somebody complaining one time saying, when Gandalf says it's October, tells Frodo it's October the 5th, if and all that. Yeah, and they said, and the person said, October, why are they using? They didn't use our calendar. They didn't. He came up with 4 different calendars in there, and it was that. The reason he says October is because it's being translated to our language.
Correct.
And that's what would be used so that we could understand. But if you want to know what it actually was, what time it was, he has all that. What the phases of the moon, where the stars were, all kinds of things he put in there because he was nutballs about making this thing as coherent.
I'm curious as to whether he would have been the best dungeon master in the world or a tedious and boring one.
Can you imagine? No, this is the thing. He'd have come up with the best adventure ever, and in 10 minutes we would have ruined it.
Yeah. I kill it all.
You're going to do what? What? All right. We'll do that. Give me 30 years and I'll write it out. Okay.
But that being said, you're
going to throw it in a volcano. What?
Yeah. You're 100% right.
Yeah, we'll go right there. Throw it in.
Yeah. Get the Eagles to take us.
His world building was so far ahead of anyone of his time. So of his time, you think about the people
Except
that were
writing
it. His world building, that is the grandest fiction. So at the same time,
shots fired.
Yeah, I am. Let's talk about the Emperor. The world building that he was doing at the time was so far ahead of anyone else of his age. He was truly a unique writer of what he was putting out. He was crafting stuff that had so much thought into what he was doing. Each character had its own history. Each history had its own previous history, which had its own timeline and its own, like Sean mentioned, its own star chart, its own moon phases, its own whatever you want to talk about. He had it all written down, and he did it all in his shed.
Yeah.
Time.
And you know what was amazing about that? Martin has other people to keep track of all his stuff for him.
Yeah.
Tolkien had none of that.
None of that.
He didn't have like a Wikipedia type program.
He did it all. Yeah, did it all on his own. I mean, that to me is amazing that he was able to do all that.
His son had to pull it all together after he died because no one had any idea what he was talking about except him in his head. It's incredible. Absolutely.
Yeah, this is what I said about like running D&D adventures now. Like they have these very beautiful hardback books that are, it's like, here's a D&D adventure. To me, that's like homework. Like I got to go read all this junk that somebody came up with and all these plots or whatever. Whereas when I'm doing my own adventure that I came up with, I already know it. It's in here. And when you guys do something unexpected, it's so easy to go, oh, okay, well then this would happen. Or they're going to go over here. I'm going to take this adventure or this plot that was going to happen over here and move them over here so that you could still, experience it, but it feels organic or whatever. You know what I mean? Like it's so much easier when you have a command of the whole. And so like me trying to run these off the shelf adventures, I don't have time for those anymore because I got to study the stupid thing and know it enough to let other players, come do with it. I much prefer to run my own. And this is kind of like, how it would be for Tolkien. He's like, it's all in here. I know everything.
I think the closest one at the time to what he was doing would have been maybe Dune.
Yeah, Frank Herbert.
Dune came a little bit later though, didn't it? Yeah.
No, he was writing it about the same time.
He was writing it I thought Dune was like the 70s.
Herbert was after. He was in the 50s. Tolkien was in the 30s. I mean, Herbert, he came after, but he had a similar
same time as he was doing the Rings. Because they interviewed Tolkien about him. They interviewed Tolkien about him and
what did he say about?
Asked him. He said he wasn't fond.
Yeah, sharp dresser, but not very good conversationalist.
That's jealousy. What? Love, you're not Tom. Nobody's Tom Bombadil. He is Elvis. He has his yellow boots. He has Goldberry.
You know what, Kelly? You need to.
I love that South Park Jesus you have there. That's
you need to make a drawing of the worst characters in all of literary history, all in one boat, and put Tom Bombadil in there. You need to put Boba Fett in there. I have to come up with a list of some other ones that
Reboot
just
Gilliman.
suck. Huh?
Reboot Gilliman.
No.
You shut your heretic mouth.
Yeah, anyone who loves Tom Bombadil cannot have a vote on who is in there. So
That's right. We'll put Rich on the boat.
I
How
will
about
say,
that?
Sean,
Rich will be the one rowing the boat for them. You guys are awesome.
Now turning the prow for 40K. I will say I have much more affection for Reboot Gilliman than I did before I started reading the material that you pointed me at. So
now notice once again,
look of vindication. Yes, I see. Very much like Reboot Gilliman, ancient but wise.
Yes.
Yeah. But honestly,
but that brings me to my other point: is that we have Dune, which you would say is kind of equivalent. And I know that pisses people off who love Dune. Oh, it's just as good and all that. That's fine. No worries. I'm putting it in the same sphere of effort as Tolkien.
Deep,
okay?
lovingly crafted background and world.
agree.
Right. He
put deep lore.
Right. Now, modern time, I would say Game of Thrones, and I would also say 40K. 40K is the other one that has
transition. Look at that.
Well, no, but it's would you disagree?
No, it's true.
Yeah.
But it's just a nice skip of the record to where we're trying to go. Very nice.
Yeah.
And I will go back and say that when I was talking about The Matrix and one of the other ones, the John Wick movies, not as deep, not as lovingly crafted. It's a light, very light version of that they've given us this kind of world that you're interested in, you want to know more of. But you can tell from the first movie as they move on, the first movie, it was very lightly sprinkled in there, and they've turned it up with the succeeding movies because it worked. You know
now,
what I mean?
this is not going to be a slight against John Wick or anything.
Right.
But I was watching a bit of Avatar the other day, and I am not a fan of Avatar. I'm not. I don't like
the
Avatar.
blue people or the Airbender.
Well,
like
either,
that's really
actually,
for what question are we talking
I'm
about?
kidding. The Na'vi, yes.
Okay.
So I think the reason that people like that one so much is because it's very flashy. It's very cool looking, and a lot of the fight scenes and that sort of thing, technology, all of that, very pedestrian in its, and again, this is my opinion, pedestrian in storytelling.
Very much.
John Wick, same kind of thing, but that's more up my alley. I love John Wick because it's got the cool fight scenes and all that. I don't need a lot of motivation for that. If you're going to show me, hey, they killed his puppy, I'm all on board. Let's kill everybody and do it in really cool ways, and let me see it, right? I'm fine with that. That, however, as you said, that's not the same thing. That's not the depth that we're talking about, right? Man, 40K, let's hope they do that one right. Oh, because you have the opportunity to meld all those worlds.
You know what I'm seeing when I look at this, Sean, as you're talking about it, and probably throughout this entire what this is probably just throughout the entire thing.
My knowing
is as soon as people run out of the source material, as soon as they run out, because I mean it happened at Game of Thrones. We can look at the Marvel stuff that happened after the cinematic, after the primary story was put out. And it's evident in the DC universe and all of these things. As soon as you run out of the source material, Lord of the Rings was fine. I mean, you had the books to draw on. You had a story that was fleshed out. As soon as you depart from that, as soon as you get away from what was created, no matter how vast, no matter how rich the universe is, unless you know how to navigate that world, everything you're going to put out afterwards is going to struggle.
Yeah, so, I mean, you talk about Rings of Power?
Yeah.
Yeah, because, if you think about it, again, how much time did Tolkien spend on his effort, right?
Right.
Versus how much time did they spend making that, right?
Right.
And so you're comparing the two. You're saying, hey, this is Lord of the Rings. This is that world. This is Tolkien. But you only spent, what, maybe 1/30 of the time that he did, building that world, and you're gonna build like this parallel, comparable, world over here. it's doomed from the beginning if you're doing that. I mean, the dude was a brilliant, genius level storyteller, and you're trying to emulate that's it's not going to happen. That's what I was saying with that 40K. You've got the same amount of time. And, you know, we've talked about this before. The unusual part is a group effort that's actually made this thing,
Shared
you know,
universe.
from then till now.
But
Sorry,
go ahead. Go ahead. Finish your point.
No. Go ahead.
No,
Mine
but
was
there's part of me
nonsense.
that's worried about that because I've been thinking about it more and more over the last few days, and I was hyping it with my family the other day, and I was saying, hey, this thing's going to happen. But then I
They're
started to
never
get
gonna get it.
I really started to get concerned because while source material for the 40K universe is out there, it's you know, you can research it, you can go back to people who were involved in the creation of it, you can have that discussion, but there's going to come a point where you're going to depart from some portion of something that's not made. And I just see, you know, I don't know. I go back to the world of where I am cautiously optimistic, but I have to check my expectations here.
Well, you know,
See,
the
I'm
one thing
more
that
optimistic because Henry Cavill's there. He's a fan. Games
Yeah.
Workshop is notorious for protecting their IP.
Yeah.
And I don't think Games Workshop is going to hand it over to somebody just because they have dollars. Games Workshop
Sure.
makes plenty of money.
Well,
Like they
they've
want to get in
interviewed-
on this, but they're not like, oh, if we don't do this, we're going to go out of business or any, you know what I'm saying? So I
Yeah.
just have a feeling that it's
I mean, that
you know,
hasn't stopped
going
them
to
from,
be handled well.
yeah. I mean,
God, I
that
hope
might be
I'm
the
right.
saving grace because that's the thing where they've not been shy in pulling back before,
Right.
right? I mean, they had that Space Marine on the you know, for Xbox, which was a game that, you know, hit it out of the park.
Right.
I don't know anybody who played that was not excited playing that game.
Yeah, that
You
was
know,
great, man.
even though it was on rails at certain points, even though it was, you know,
Mhm.
you had to, you know, I know I have to push the C button here, but
Yeah, that's all
it's
right. Put me on a rail if I got a thunder hammer and a million orcs to kill. I'm all right with
yeah,
that, man.
right. But there's that point, and I hope that they hang on to that. I hope that the flash of all that money, because let's be honest, Amazon can flash a lot of money in front of somebody,
Yeah.
and
Yeah, but
hopefully
we've
they
seen
hold on to
also
that.
where that doesn't pay off because they can just be like, yeah, that's a lot of money, but look at Rings of Power.
See,
Oh,
I
no,
wonder
thanks.
if they're going to be better with that because they've been shown a lot of money before and turned it down, you know, and so maybe that bodes well.
Yeah, like I said, I'm more optimistic than cautious, but I'm always want to put because my fear is that somebody somewhere in Hollywood that wants to put their stamp on it or wants to, you know, everybody wants to get their 3 cents in. Oh, what if we did this? Or oh, what if we do that? And you got to shut those guys up and put them in a closet somewhere.
right.
So because it's a shared universe, let me say that unlike very much like the Marvel universe, because it's separated into various people, and each piece of it is its own unique piece of IP that no one producer, director, any one person can latch onto it and say, this is what it is.
Right. They didn't
So
buy like a
diverse.
script from some guy and they're like, cool, but we're going to make some changes. I've got some notes and they're going to go,
So
you
it's
know.
so deep and diverse that no one person can say this is what it is. So their IP is so spread out. And by design, I mean, Games Workshop has been holding this close to their chest for so long. It's been like, honestly, it's been like a Catan. It's been condensed down into this one thing that's ready to explode into the consciousness of everyone else, right? So we are,
and they have the source material. It exists in the form of Black Library and the rule books and these kind of things.
66
Or if they want to run off and come up with their own story, there's plenty of room in the sandbox for that as well. You know what I mean? So that's
audiobooks. 66 pages of websites that have audiobooks, you know, like 10 to 12 audiobooks on each page of the material. So where you're saying where the material is finite, where they can only draw so much off, where they're able to tell their story. You've got 66, you know, it's just at my estimation, 66 web pages of various stories that they can draw from to push their IP forward.
I agree with that, Rich. I agree with that wholeheartedly. But there's also decades worth of comic book material that people can draw on, and DC has found a way to not hit that out of the park at all. You know,
but that's a much more limited medium. the comic book graphic novel medium has long been vilified as something for the commoner, something for the idiot, something for someone who doesn't know any better, the nerd, the geek.
That's why I never
everything
got
else.
into it.
Yeah,
Yeah, and that's why the Marvel movies haven't done very
you're
well.
you're of a higher level.
Yeah.
But what they've done with 40K is they've pushed it into the novel market. The novel market is something, and it's not.
That's a fair
It's
point.
not it's not the dollar book that you used to buy on the supermarket shelf.
Damn you, Rich, with your fair point.
Yeah, well, occasionally I have a thought that's worth a shit, but but it's not the dollar novel or the $2.50 novel that you used to buy off the supermarket shelf. It's
If I could draw
$6.99.
a blind squirrel finding a nut, I would right now, but I can't.
It's the $6.99. It's the $10.99. It's the $12.99 novel that you buy at Barnes and Noble and at previously Walden Books, which doesn't exist anymore, or Borders, which doesn't exist anymore. Or Amazon,
which doesn't exist anymore.
Where are you buying all these?
Amazon, but they've managed to tie it into Amazon.
Rich hasn't read anything since the late 80s because all his bookstores have gone out of business.
All those bookstores were great, and people that don't believe so have lost out. But that being said, my point is that they've managed to push it into a mainstream that comic books have never reached. Even though comics are on the graphic novel shelf of Barnes and Noble for 2 or 3 shelves, they don't reach the same apex as the novel, which 40K and Black Library has managed to insert themselves into.
Yeah.
That means something when you try to push that over to a cinematic or television market.
But you know why that's been so successful is because the concept of the Emperor and the Primarchs and the Custodes and all of those at that upper level, not the Astartes, but anything above the Astartes, that carries with it this. Well, that carries with it this, like you were talking about with DC, this mythic level, of intrigue and just looking at that spectacle and the tragedy of it and all of that. That's why people are so interested in that. Yes. And if you can carry that majesty from the novel into the series, I think then you've got some winning material. That was the thing about Lord of the Rings, is that you had Sauron.
Yes.
Sauron, and let's be honest, Sauron is a lesser character out of the entirety of the story of, Middle Earth. He was like lower management, You had so many things going on, and look at how successful it was because of Sauron and the way that he was portrayed.
He's Morgoth's busboy.
Yeah,
basically.
He was. Yeah. So when you think about it in those terms, think about how successful it was because you had someone like Sauron, who did not have he didn't have but like a minute of, or not even that, whatever he had at the very beginning of the movie was all you needed to set the stage. Here's your villain, here's what's going on, here's your compelling story and all of that. We don't want this to come back and all that. You had the same kind of thing going on, but on the larger scale with 40K. So it's more like the Silmarillion in scale and magnitude. Maybe a little, one of the stories out of the Silmarillion, right? I think you have the possibility of having that same connection, or most of it. Some of the stuff won't translate. You don't have any love stories in 40K. That just doesn't happen. But there's some.
After Amazon gets through with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
By
the way, this is why I think we talked about what stories should they tell. Go with the grand right off the bat, just like you did with Lord of the Rings.
I want the mundane trooper in a trench fighting against some guys in the mud.
Who I was thinking about?
That's what I want. I can relate to that.
I was reading an article today that made me think of Mark. It was an article that said, who could Brie Larson play in the 40K universe, right? And
someone who's killed in the first.
So they had her cast as all kinds of different things, from sororitas to inquisitor and all that. And one of them was an inquisitor who's having an affair with Caiaphas Cain, who is who is a, like you said, Mark, mundane commissar with the Imperial Guard, and they were saying we could have Brie Larson as the Inquisitor, and who could play Caiaphas Cain? Well, what about The Rock?
And what if they both got killed by a Tyranid bioform?
And I thought to myself, okay, that's just such a waste on so many levels.
Right. And see, this is the weird thing about Hollywood and movies and whatnot. There are some times where I want to see The Rock in a movie. And there's sometimes where I want to see, the star. Like, I know if I'm going to see a Tom Cruise movie, I know what I'm getting regardless of what the movie is. Right.
Yeah.
But then there's Gary Oldman. You never know what you're going to get with a movie Gary Oldman's been in, right? He disappears into that role and he plays an amazing, villain or hero or Commissioner Gordon or whoever he's playing. So, like, for $40K, I've said this about Henry Cavill, like, I'm less interested in who Henry Cavill plays, as I'm more interested in him being on the executive producer side and crafting good stories and a good universe and good all of that. I don't care if we put a Space Marine helmet on him and we never see his face, right? I don't want to see my favorite actor in the 40K universe. I want to see the 40K universe. In some ways, you're better served to get these guys out of there, because they're going to detract if it's too big of a star.
But that's Sean's point, though. I mean, when I listen to what Sean's talking about, that's where I start to get concerned. People are going to rush at this and want to use this as a vehicle for something else,
right,
rather than being the story itself. And
but it can be done well. Like when you look at Charlize Theron in Mad Max Fury Road, right? She's a beautiful actress. Shaved her hair, covered in mud and makeup and all of this and whatnot. Like she did not outshine that role.
I like,
you know
Kelly's
what I'm saying?
drawings.
They did a good job of taking a Hollywood actress and putting her into this role that she
all 40K books should be illustrated by Kelly.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, thanks for your PowerPoint overshadowing my point that I was making. I really appreciate that. Way to be on the podcast team there, Rich.
Mark, it was a very interesting story. You told it with such passion. And
I know,
you told it so well.
And the distraction. Okay, cool, awesome. Yeah,
what I'm here for.
Yeah, I think the story you have, go with the biggest right off the bat. Go with something that's just earth-shattering. Don't start with this small, stupid thing. I know there's so many people who like, well, what about the relatable guy and all? Nobody cares about that. They want the magnificent right off the bat. Once you get that,
I want 3 seasons about an Escher ganger coming of age in the Spire.
Oh man, that would depress me if they did something like that. Oh my gosh, that would depress me to no end.
I agree with you, Sean.
She's in love with an Orlok, but it's forbidden.
Showing the scope of the galaxy, as opposed
friggin' Romeo and Juliet in there.
bringing it down to the individual, showing the valuelessness, the
what?
lack of valuelessness.
Did you have a stroke?
Valueless.
The lack of individuality of a person in the 40K.
I'm going to drive to your house and check on you. Are you okay?
Are you done? Wait, let's bring it back. Hold on.
I think the word you're looking for is lack of value.
So
Mark,
you
get the IED.
Of
Kelly, you call 911. I'm on my
Clear.
The best podcast. The lack of value of the individual in the 40K universe is the universal value of the story. The fact that an individual is just a piece of grist for the mill, whereas the greater story depends on the actions of everyone in the 40K universe. Reboot Gilliman is an individual in the universe.
Reboot. Yeah,
Gilliman. It opposes me at all levels. But the fact that he is.
Yes,
I agree.
But he's also
every time.
Every time. The second he gets on his roll.
He's
but
like
he's also
Forrest
a
Gump.
cog.
He's like Forrest Gump when he's getting ready to make the speech about Vietnam at the
Got
peace
shot
rally.
directly in the butt.
That's all Rich has to say about that.
Oh my God.
In the world are on
Oh.
these 3 levels. Look at them all. See them? So
Yes.
What?
yeah, the fact
Just
that
nod. Yeah.
he's-
Yeah, I totally good point.
Fair point, Rich.
He's just a piece of the whole story, but he's also powerless in the progression of the story. Rabute.
Yes.
Guillemot.
Because
Robert
that's
King.
what we need in our entertainment is characters that have no effect on the outcome of the story.
They do
I
have
think
an effect.
that's
They do have an effect.
that's a
but
recipe
they're-
for some compelling content there.
They do have an effect, but their belief in their own effect is not.
Well, you know
I
that
know, I know what you're saying.
the
Contrast
beauty
the
of those
art.
characters, and this is the thing I think you're driving at, Rich, is, and if it's not, it should be, is that those
It is.
those
It is. We're on the
Those
same level,
characters-
buddy.
What Rich meant to say was what, Sean?
Help me out.
those characters aren't on rails. They have an actual arc for their
Yes.
development, no matter how
Correct.
powerful they are. That's the thing I love. Everybody goes into it thinking, oh, the Emperor's this, the Custodies are that, and all this stuff. And then the writers are given this opportunity to actually show you development for these characters. The behind the scenes, if you will, the faults and foibles and growth and trips and all that they make. Those I think are amazing. And that's what I love about the novels is that it takes these, like you said, the mythic characters, right? But it brings them to a more accessible, practical kind of storytelling where I remember when I first was reading these, and I've mentioned this to you, I was like, man, how do you write for a Primarch like that? Because you're just going to screw it up. You can't do it right. And they did it beautifully in so many different aspects. With the caveat that, and you mentioned this, Rich, purposely putting in there doubt about the storytelling, that you never know if what's being related is actually the truth. So you can end up with 2 different versions, 3 different versions of stuff. I thought that's brilliant
Unreliable
too.
narrator.
Yeah, well said, Rich. I agree.
Thank you
It
for
was.
taking my thoughts and turning them into cogent points. I
You're
appreciate
welcome. Oh, well, all you have to do is turn the stupid filter off. That's all.
it. Yeah, I know. We're back where we started at the beginning.
That's right. Just dial that down to normal. You got it on max. Maybe just dial it back a little bit.
You got it at Spinal
Now
Tap
that
level.
I have 3 shirts to tell me where I'm going, I feel like the master of the Mechanicus, where I have multiple brains telling me what to think.
You're welcome.
Yeah, well,
By the way, I'm very, you guys I know have started to read, Rich has finished it.
Yeah.
Mark and Kelly, I know you're partway through,
Homework.
or partway
You're racing through
the
the
Emperor's Legion.
Yeah.
Yes.
don't race. Listen, enjoy.
Because I really, this was actually, I think, the first one for the Indomitus Crusade that I read. And I'm really glad I did, because it gave a really good look, a really in-depth look, like we were just talking about, to go back to Rich's point, about characters that are very, in many people's eyes, stereotypical.
Yeah,
Very vanilla, bland, that kind of thing. Man, it gives them depth. And, I'm not ashamed to say I saw them with this depth long ago. Everybody else just had to catch up, and that's okay. I've got patience and I've got tolerance for those who are lesser. Okay, so don't be afraid
Thank
to
you.
tackle that. You're welcome. You're welcome. Don't be afraid to tackle that. And I'm eager to see, as you grow and get closer to where I am, how you take these epiphanies and turn them into actual thoughts and then words and try to relate them.
Maybe someday.
Well, the Emperor is the weapon.
Only aspire.
We'll discuss that later. How the Emperor is the weapon.
And then after this one, I mean, who knows? We'll have you guys pick one or something. But Mark, I think you would really like that Belisarius Call one. But
It's
you
very
can't
good.
you
Very
can't
good.
tell me the Emperor's Legion. That wouldn't make a great like it wouldn't make a great series.
It'd be all right,
It
I
wouldn't
guess.
be super long or anything like that, but it would be a buildup. It would be kind of like Andor, where at the beginning you're like, I don't know where this is going. It seems kind of slow. And man, like you said, Rich, it turns up to 11 really fast.
Yeah, it's no
And
joke. It goes
now,
hard.
That's currently around 3 for me. So I'm,
Now
yeah.
it's gonna take off, buddy. I'm
Yeah,
telling
see,
you,
I was
it
the
takes
same
off
way
quick.
when I was
Yeah, there's
reading
all
it for
these
the first
intrigue
time.
about a High Lord of Terra vote. It's like, wow, this is amazing, and it is actually really interesting. But
Well, it is, but I mean, if you're a fan of the
yeah,
material, I mean, you've never seen the High Lords before, and
right,
Yeah.
right.
in depth and all. So that part, yeah, there's some novelty to it. But
Yeah, like
man,
here's a big deal in the Ministorium, and you're like,
Yeah.
okay, this guy's like, head paper pusher for
Yeah.
lack of a better term.
Yeah.
But it's
Yeah.
interesting, you know what I mean? You're like, oh, he's a
Oh,
really
very
good
important.
paper pusher.
I need to
So-
make this accounting.
So the second time I read it, or the second time I listened to it, which was this past week, I really enjoyed it because I knew what was coming and was able to listen to it with those different ears, I suppose. And that's when I was thinking, yeah, it does kind of remind me of Andor that way. It's kind
So
of
what's coming?
well, I don't want to ruin it.
No
for
spoilers.
You
You guys are about
What's
to be
coming is the
blown
Indominus.
away.
But more important, the thing that was more important to me than what happens in the book that way was the exploration of the Custodes. I really like Valerian. I love his character, the Custodes guy. The insight you get into the Custodes and all of that, because they're not like we were talking about before. They're not all the same. They're not all the same.
It's a far departure
They're
from
not.
the world of Diocletian to where we are now.
Yeah.
I have to say I'd rather go back to the Master Mankind Custodians instead.
I don't know about that. I like Valerian a lot.
Kelly and I are going to finish that book up this week, and so
maybe
we can talk about that in detail.
What's that, Constantine Valdor in the Heresy. So Constantine Valdor is one idea of the Custodes, and then what you're getting through Valerian is another idea of a Custodes.
Yeah.
It's a very interesting, like 10,000 year journey of where these guys started and where these guys finished.
But it also gives you an insight into the Emperor too. That here's what's needed here, and over time it's going to turn into this.
I see him as an absentee leader who just feels entitled. That's all I see.
You gotta keep going, buddy.
Now I'll tell you what I feel about him with that is that, think about it this way. Remember I was talking about you have the ability to see the possible future, right? Or those different strands. You're on a timeline. You got to do as much as you can, as quick as you can, and this might happen, but you got to get here regardless. Yeah. So you're trying to take the broadest steps you can with that. Well, man, can you imagine at your jobs, your various jobs, how many people at your various jobs sit there and give 30%, maybe 10%? Maybe they actively work against what everybody else is doing because they want to do something different, right? Yeah, I ain't down with that, man. They might be my manager, but they're not my boss. I'm leaving, that kind of thing. Hey, I'm gonna dip for 2 hours, man. I'll see you. I'm not about that. You guys go ahead. That kind of thing. The apathy that's out there in the human race is what he's fighting against. Not just chaos.
Yeah. No, that's evident.
But what about a guy who gives 100% for 50,000 years? Well, 100% for 50,000 years.
You magnify that by the power level that the people you have to use in order to run this thing. They have to be there for this part, but all the other stuff they're going to do is going to be a problem, and you have to try to fight those ripples through time. And trying to figure out, okay, well, if I push a rock here, how's it going to end up down here, kind of thing,
Well, not to get too far ahead of the conversation because we don't want to get into the book just yet. But I think between the two, what struck me is the dichotomy of the two worlds, right? The master of
Mhm.
mankind, what was happening at that time, versus what's happening. I mean, as Mark said, a really good paper pusher, but this sort of puffed up belief in my position and what it means. I mean, the political intrigue, and you go back to the final conversation between who was it, the emperor and was it Diocletian at the end of
Yeah,
Master of
yeah,
Mankind?
Yeah.
You go back to that conversation and play through their points back and forth with one another, and you look at the 40K universe, and you're like,
right.
okay, I see it. I see
Yeah,
it.
and it seems perverse. You
Oh, very
know,
much.
It's
Mhm.
you're
bureaucracy
looking.
given the reference of a church.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and you're looking at, like you said, Kelly, you're looking at that conversation with him and Diocletian, and there's an ideal there. There's a certain purity there. You might not agree with their philosophy or whatever,
Oh, sure. Yeah.
but there's a certain purity of that philosophy there, and you understand what the goal is and all of that. And then you look at what happens, like you said, 10,000 years later and what it's turned into and all, and you think, my goodness, what a soul crushing thing to look forward in time and see this is what it's going to turn into. Okay, I'm going to have to, if everybody did their part, how much easier would it be? And now I'm going to have to shoulder all of this crap on top of having to sit on this stupid chair for 10,000 years screaming into the night so that everybody can travel back and forth. It's
Glorified
it's
crossing guard.
really well, yeah, it's really depressing, and you can imagine how oppressive that would be, knowing your time is getting shorter, that chair's getting closer, and your watch is about to begin, that kind of thing. And then the end game at the end, oh my goodness. And as you get into it, I again, I don't want to go into too much, but when you said in your email to me earlier, Kelly, that you wanted to talk about the hubris and the what else did you say? The hubris, the
I don't remember what I write. That's why I write it down.
Yeah, you don't have to remember.
He writes it down, and then
I
it's
ain't got
gone.
time for
the
all that.
hubris, the pride, or something like that. I
Yeah, there's
forget what
some.
it
I mean,
was.
there's elements to this that need to be picked apart.
Yeah,
But for whatever reason, it's an interesting sort, because you make that large time jump, and then it's interesting to see what became and what that
right.
conversation was. And I even go back to my points that I made at the end of Master of Mankind, where I had criticisms for the Emperor, and I had criticisms for Diocletian, and I think both made points. But now I got to go back and revisit those thoughts and say, okay, was I even close to right in my analysis of what was happening
And
versus what
as a
is?
reader, I give you a huge amount of credit for that. A lot of people don't like even doing that. A lot of people don't. They'll, instead of having to go back and think about it and reevaluate and all that, they seek to just justify what they were thinking on
Yeah,
in the first,
thinking's
even
really
if they
hard.
do.
I'd rather just feel.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, and so I give you a lot of credit for
My
that.
emotions. My
I
emotions are
hope
great.
I hope they keep that same nuance of requirement for whatever project they make, rather than making something where it's just, yeah, like you said, I just want to feel, right? Please don't dumb it down. I really hope they don't. And I don't think Henry Cavill, I think the thing he appreciates is that nuance.
I
So,
mean, but both are required. You got to think and feel at the same time to do it right. But
Yeah.
but it is that thing at the end of the day, when you're telling that story, there is that fine line between being a hero and being a villain. Somebody's hero is somebody else's villain,
yeah.
and there's 1,000 different ways to look at the parties involved to come to a conclusion. But
Yeah.
but
But
it is,
what if you're neither? What if
what if you're neither
the
what?
idea of well, no, what if the idea of a hero and a villain is all based upon where you're standing, where that person's making decisions? So I have to say, Sean has really pushed my estimation of the Emperor forward as to where he is in the yes, there you go. There's the nod and the note. So Lord, I have to give this up to the writers. They have changed my opinion. Originally I thought like, well, the Emperor, he's this immortal creature that passes judgment on all of humanity, and everyone is subservient to him. But as I have learned more about where he came from, where the forces that affected him were emanated from, where he had to make decision points as to what he would be doing, I have come to believe that he's the same thing that I thought about the things that he made. So the things that he made, Space Marines, the Custodes, the Imperium, are no more than reflections of what he is himself. And he is actually a tool of forces greater than himself.
Well,
And
that's it, but
the
don't
story
get
which is
into
grander.
that. Don't get into that.
Yeah, I'm not getting into it, but I'm saying that story it's grander.
Well, that's
than
the
what
I
thing
don't know.
is
That
told
sounds
in the
vaguely
beginning.
blasphemous to me. I'm not sure I want
Well,
to hear
but
it.
that's
Yeah,
the
well,
thing.
I'd be blasphemous. I'd be hereticus.
But see,
You know?
that's the thing. I want to see what they think about it because I feel
Yeah.
the same way you do about it, Rich, is that I feel actually very sorry for him because
Yeah.
you feel like he was, at least I do.
tool.
I feel like he was kind of doomed to
Yeah.
what he is. And it makes a lot of sense as you get into the story. You're like, yeah, that makes sense. That makes perfect sense as to how that
Yeah.
happened. And you see him not as more like a Dr. Manhattan. He's a puppet, but he sees the strings.
Yes.
And that's about it, you know.
Yes.
But it'll be interesting to see what you guys think as that moves on.
Yeah.
But again, this particular one you're reading now was for me more about the Custodes, and the Sisters of Silence, the Psychona Anathema, and
Anathema. Yes.
and their growth over time, because they actually, I wonder what they're doing with them now. Because remember, the Soulless used to be a creation of the Catan.
Yeah.
In the old lore, it was that the pariahs were creations of the Necrons, and they were going around collecting them, and you know all that stuff. And now they've changed it so that it's different again. So I wonder what they're doing with that way. But now the Sisters and the Custodes have been paired together since the Horus Heresy, before the Horus Heresy, and all that
They're
stuff.
a big deal. They're not a minor storyline. They're now a big deal.
Yeah, and so seeing those characters and how they've progressed and what they have to deal with, who they are, how they've changed, I really enjoyed this book for that. Not just the part that's coming up, which is actually a pretty big deal in the book there. And I'm anxious to see what you think of that part too. So,
well, now I'm excited to
do
finish.
your homework.
And hope,
All right.
man, that would make a great one. That would, but it'd be a tough start because for people who aren't initiated, all the bureaucratic stuff would be like, okay, I don't care. The administratum guy, I got it. The assassinorum guy, I got it. Oh, that's great. They got a big table and it's kind of like Kelly would say, it would seem to be another show about some big corporate or government entity where people are jockeying for power and all this stuff, and I don't care. I really don't.
Right. But that's super important.
But that's the thing. Well, it is, but it's also not the most pressing threat. It is the cause of the most danger, but it's not the most pressing threat. And the most pressing threat, becomes evident later on. Much like in Game of Thrones, much like in House of the Dragon, that sort of thing. So if they could move it along that way, that'd be great. But anything in Heresy, any of that stuff would be great.
You've got multiple conflicts. So you've got conflicts on one level, conflicts on a higher level, and conflicts on a level above that.
Just no Catacan, no Caiaphas Cain. I don't need that. I don't need
Ghost. I'm waiting for it. Waiting for it.
Jakaro.
Yeah, some
Jakaro. Actually,
the Jakaro with their fingertip weapons.
You know who the Jakaro would be like? And actually, I'd be all down for that. Watching a show that's all about a Jakaro, just happening around the human universe there or galaxy. That would make me think very much of like a Doctor Who kind of character, but one who doesn't talk. and when the
weapons only.
That's right. And when the going gets tough, he just leaves. Pulls out like some paper, makes some weird shape, and then he's gone.
Steps through the webway.
Yeah, the Jakaro to me have always been one of the most fascinating races. I love that, man. I would love to see them actually do one where you see. Remember the old description of the Jakaro ships? Do you remember that at a Rogue Trader?
No walls.
No walls.
No walls, yeah.
No walls at all. Just, some weird shape out of the struts and they're good to go. I always thought that was kind of cool, freaky and cool. So
I just like the fact that they're depicted as giant orangutans with
I know.
digital weapons.
Yeah. And you know what? If they got their stuff together to where they wanted to do something as a group, imagine how powerful they would actually be. It would be
Couldn't
like
be
an
that powerful.
entire.
They still only have 10 fingers. So
What if that's how 40K ends? The Jakaro win.
Wouldn't that be awesome, man?
yeah,
It'd be like a bunch of forges from Marvel,
yeah.
coming together in 40K and just taking over everything, or wiping it out, not even taking it over.
Yeah.
Just like, we don't need you guys anymore. Just make one big
We don't
gun.
care.
I left for a little. You guys are
We don't
messing this
care
whole
about
thing
it.
up.
Wake up one morning, it's just this massive gun barrel pointed at the galaxy and just bang.
So let me know. So my recent exploration of 40K lore has turned me on to Mark's love of the Necrons. They are such dicks.
What do you mean, Mark's love? I love the Necrons too.
I
don't
loved
like
them
them.
first.
But Mark,
No, you
Mark,
didn't.
I
What?
did.
You did
I
not.
loved them from the beginning. It was a forbidden love.
You loved them once you found out you could just dip and flick them. That's what it was.
So easy to paint. Oh my god.
they really are such jerks. They're just like, well, we don't want to get along with the people that are better than us. So
I
we're
just
going
wish they
to-
were like in the old days where they just didn't talk to anybody. They just killed you. You weren't worth it. Not going to deign to talking to you. It's like me talking to rats, in my house.
But
I'm
that's
trying to make a
only-
deal with mice,
That's only past their point of where they were in the war in heaven, So that whole piece of lore, it's fascinating to me. Where they pulled the
Yeah.
Catan off the suns, and they're like the Catan.
See, that part I thought was great. Love
Yeah.
that. Love the Catan, love the old ones, all that stuff. I think it's great.
Fascinating. And that
But-
dips into the Emperor later, but we'll talk about that later.
Yeah.
So.
All right, guys. Well, before Rich gets off into a tangent and reveals
No,
everything.
I'm not. I'm stopping. Jerk.
Sounds like it. Yeah.
Worst undercover cop ever.
Terrible. Terrible. Well,
Hey, you guys know where I could find some crime?
Do you have any crack? You got some crack?
Would you happen to have enough crack for like 30 years in prison, maybe?
We can talk.
All right, guys. Well, thank you very much.
Good talk.
Next
Very
time we
good.
meet, next time we get together, hopefully you'll have the book done, and
Read
we
it.
can start our next one. I'm thinking for the next one after that, maybe not going back to the Horus Heresy, but doing Belisarius' Call.
Yeah, it's good. Very good.
Mark, I think about
I'm
that
down
book
with
with you a lot. I figure you'd
Okay.
like that. So
All right, I'm down with it. Let's do it.
Belisarius' Call can do anything.
Oh, he's my new favorite.
and it has one of my favorite characters, Alpha Primus. So
Yeah, Alpha
Yeah,
Primus
he was
is
my
good,
favorite Autobot.
which would make a great band name. Great band name, Alpha
but
Primus.
You will hear that again. Belisarius' Call can do anything.
Mm.
Almost.
Spoilers.
Catan
No.
can do anything.
No, I don't have to read it.
So-
I just know.
I have to say,
Yeah.
compared to where I thought he was, compared to where he came out, I'm much more agreed to Belisarius' Call than where I was before. So
Yeah, he's an intriguing character.
Yeah.
So,
very much.
all right, boys, I love you all deeply and completely.
Merry
Yeah.
Christmas.
And I will see you guys next time. All right.
All right.
All right,
Bye.
bye.
Bye, Gwandai.
Bye. One out.
This concludes our Speak Nerd and Enter broadcast.